Montgomery Jones and the Wizard's Revenge by LH Damelin, read by Peter Gilchrist. Chapter 4. And so Montgomery Jones and Douglas and Jemima, led by Muggins the leprechaun, left the bantering barrel and jade bullfrog inn and set off on the next leg of their adventure on that fine autumnal Sunday morning down a long meandering road that led them away from Frogmore's establishment and through the fields and farmlands and sleepy villages and over hills and pretty wooded dales, until after several hours of trekking and a brief rest stop for a bite at lunch, the travellers found that the path they were on began to rise steeply and unevenly, cutting its way through the huge outcrops of sandstone until finally it levelled out onto a wide rocky plain, and before them lay a blackness, a huge smudge of dark bordered by daylight, as if the giant hand of Atlas himself had liberally applied black boot polish to a vast patch of the clear blue sky, and there, straddling the road, was a great weathered stone archway on which was engraved, "Be wary, all ye lovers of light, for 'twas decreed that here be constant and eternal night." "What is this place?" exclaimed Montgomery Jones. "This is Knockburg, city of night, where the dawn has banished and darkness is eternal," replied Muggins. "It's a town where you're bound to meet all manner of folk who'll be shunned by the daylight. I brought you here because if you were to cross the vanishing river via the toll bridge into the Forsaken Lands, you'll need 2 items for your journey, and there's a place in this town, a shop of sorts, perhaps the only one of its kind in the whole of this world, where, such items may be acquired." "But when you say folk who have shunned the daylight, who exactly are you referring to?" asked Douglas. "Stay close to me, and they won't bother you," was all the leprechaun replied, and he beckoned them to follow him under the arch and into the darkness. And dark it was, pitch dark, like a black fog, dense and heavy and sticky, like molasses. It clung to them and the space around them. "Walk dead ahead of you. Don't despair. We're almost out of the tunnel and things will be far better on the other side," announced Muggins. And this was true indeed, for a few moments later they could make out a faint glow and emerged out of the darkness onto a cobbled street with sooty gas lights that bathed everything in a reddish-orange light. The sky above was black like the tunnel they'd exited and starless. But the town was a bustling and noisy place with lit shop fronts and pavements full of pedestrians, strange people mostly, with long faces filled with small sharp teeth and pointed ears, and distinctly goblin-like in appearance, who gave the visitors suspicious and sometimes unfriendly stares. Muggins seemed oblivious of the hubbub and attention, and appeared to be very familiar with Knockburg, for he darted up and down the lanes and byways and navigated a maze of cobble streets that all looked very much the same, without hesitating or pausing to look up at the garbled or faded street signs. "Not far now," he suddenly remarked in a loud mumble that seemed more for his own benefit. "But don't stray or lag. This part of town is peculiar. Now it's darker. Stay close." Muggins rounded a corner and they were suddenly in a much older part of the city, where ramshackle houses with darkened windows seemed to lean exhaustedly one against another, and the things about them cast deeper and darker shadows in the sparsely lit and deserted streets. Every so often they would hear a flutter and see a huge bat fly over them or circle, almost curiously above their heads. Muggins, noticing the creatures, increased his pace to a trot, charged around another corner, and there, on the opposite side of a narrow cobbled lane called Hemagon Avenue, according to a rusty signpost a few feet from the group, was a small, dishevelled, double-story building whose front was illuminated by two large red lanterns hanging from ornamental chains that flanked a faded sign which read, Engelbart and Porticia Parrots, Emporium of Trinkets, Charms and Curiosities, and the occasional unexpected mode of transport. Be warned. Will buy and trade all items of interest, but reserve the right not to serve if we don't like the look of you. Oh, thank heavens, here at last, announced Muggins, visibly relieved, and pressed his companions to cross the lane and make their way towards the shop in all haste. But as they approached the old signpost, a large black bat landed on it, considered them with glowing crimson eyes, while hanging upside down, then dropped to the ground, transforming first into a black, shapeless vapor, and then into a strange, shadowy figure of a man with long, bony fingers, and pale moon face and thin blue lips, and jet black, slick-back hair, and the same deep-set crimson eyes. On his chest, attached to a heavy chain around his neck, was a large copper medallion, ancient-looking and covered in green-blue verdigris, with a face engraved on it that bore a striking resemblance to his own. Jemima let out a gasp of surprise when it became apparent to all of them the face on the medallion was actually alive, and blinked and scowled, and mirrored the expression of the man on which it hung. My, what have we here? Said the man in a rather odd, high-pitched voice. A leprechaun and 3 humans a very long way from home. How delectable! Be off with you, vampire, or I'll do you some ill, shouted Muggins. Nonsense, you do no such thing. We both know that your magic has no power over the undead, replied the man with a smile that revealed 2 huge fangs. Oh, run along and take the old one with you. I don't like beef jerky, he added, and the face of the medallion burst into hideous laughter, obviously finding the vampire's joke hilarious. No, as for the other 2, they look decidedly fresh. You'll stick your filthy fangs into them over my dead body, roared Montgomery Jones. If you insist, replied the vampire, advancing menacingly in Montgomery Jones' direction. No, there's really no need for any of that, said Jemima calmly, while rummaging in her bag. If you're peckish, Mr. Vampire, perhaps you'd prefer a bit of this to chew on, she announced, pulling out a large sausage and making a lunge with it at the vampire, as if it were a bayonet. Gosh! Screamed the face on the medallion, and the vampire jumped back 6 feet, as if stung by a hornet. He hissed, enraged and baring his awful fangs. You're going to need a lot more of that to fend all of us off. And suddenly, the darkness above them was filled with countless swirling crimson-eyed black bats. Easily remedied, announced Montgomery Jones. He quickly placed his hand on the sausage and shouted, Genesium, multipum, multiply, rapidium. And suddenly, one sausage was a pile of 200 sausages. Oh, gosh, roared the medallion. I'll give you a gash, you foul creature, cried the leprechaun. As quick as lightning, he grabbed 2 of the sausages and threw them at the vampire with incredible force, hitting the man squarely on the nose and his medallion at the same time. which resulted in a loud sizzling, as if the sausages had landed on a searing hot griddle. The vampire screamed in rage and pain, jumped into the air, turned into a bat, and flew off into the night, leaving a trail of smoke in his wake. "Well hit, sir, well hit," shouted Monty excitedly. "Now, I suggest we put pay to the rest of these batty beasts." And he grabbed a sausage and threw it at one of the swooping bats, which got struck on the right wing, gave a pained shriek, and nosedive into an old house on the opposite side of the road. "Oh, don't fret about them, Mr. Jones. You folk make your way to the Emporium as quickly as possible. You'll be safe once you're in there. I'll take great pleasure in swatting the rest of these flies, and I'll join you shortly. Now make haste," cried Muggins. So Douglas, his uncle, and Jemima ran across the road to the strange little Emporium, but before entering, they couldn't help but turn round and watch as Muggins whipped up the pile of sausages into a swirling, glowing whirlwind, which simultaneously sucked the bats into itself and bombarded them with flying sausages until soon all flew screaming and wailing into the darkness and were gone. "What are those sausagey things?" asked an amazed Douglas. "They're my dad's garlic vegan knackwurst," replied Jemima. "This brand tastes a bit like garlic-flavoured cardboard, if you ask me. But the fridge was rather low on supplies when I was looking for some provisions for the journey, so I threw them into a bag for good measure. Virtually inedible, but surprisingly good vampire repellents, as it turns out. Of course, because vampires hate garlic. What a stroke of genius," explained Douglas. "Extraordinary, quite extraordinary, Miss Hall," marvelled Montgomery Jones. "Now, let's get indoors before something else in this strange town tries to sink its fangs into us." Good old Muggins. He appears to have everything in hand. So, that's what they did. Engelbart and Portia Parrots, Emporium of trinkets, charms, and curiosities, like so many things in life, was not at all what it appeared to be from the outside. When Douglas and Jemima and Montgomery Jones entered through its dusty wooden doors, followed by a triumphant Muggins shortly after, they found themselves in a most peculiar place. For one thing, it wasn't small or poky, as the outside of the building led one to believe, but it was huge, enormous, gigantic. A vast, dimly lit rectangular warehouse with a staggeringly high ceiling. A space so large that to be at one end meant not being able to see the other end as it faded away into a hazy darkness. But the space, although vast, was not empty, not in the least. It was filled with drawers. Everywhere one looked, that's all that could be seen. Thousands and thousands and thousands of drawers. All wooden, mostly square and unnumbered, lining the wall from floor to the very top of the ceiling, and also in giant chests, organized in countless rows like dominoes. Not far from the door they'd entered through, which seemed like it belonged to a doll's house in comparison to the vastness of everything else, was a shop counter. And standing behind it was an elderly woman with silvery grey hair forced back into a tight bun, held in place with a multitude of coloured hairpins. She wore old blue overalls and had a nub of a pencil behind one ear, and would have looked normal for this outlandish place if it weren't for the fact that she was at least 15 feet tall. "Muggins McTavish," said the woman rather curtly. It's been a long while, but then I never forget a name or a face. Couldn't help but notice you and your companions had a bit of a run-in with Harry Pennyville just now. Well, you certainly showed him and his friends a thing or two. It was most entertaining. Good to see you again, Patricia. Look, where's Engelbert? I half expected him to help us out, knowing his dislike of vampires, replied Muggins. Alas, my brother is now the late Engelbert Parrot. He was always a careless man at the best of times, but outdid himself last year by mishandling a shipment of fire charms. You know what those are like when they go wrong. Burnt to a cinder he was. Nothing but ashes. At least I was spared the funeral expenses. Mind the train. Train? What train? Said a puzzled Montgomery Jones, but there was no need for clarification, for alongside the counter, under everyone's feet, a railway suddenly materialized, and a moment later, a terrific clanging and puffing and whistling announced the arrival of a huge train that roared out of the darkness in a cloud of smoke and steam, past the astounded onlookers and missing them by a hair's width as it raced into the mouth of a gaping black tunnel that had appeared near the door, and which promptly disappeared when the train was gone. Express from Fosterville, always bang on time, confirmed Patricia Barrett, turning round to look at the railway clock on the wall behind her. Now, how can I help you? My friends need to get to the Forsaken Lands, Patricia. Now, need I say more? Remarked Muggins. You needn't, Mr. McTarry, said the woman. Then she stepped out from behind the counter and walked off to a panel of drawers not far from them. Then an extraordinary thing happened. Patricia Parrott's body began to stretch like a well-chewed piece of bubble gum. And like a super-long fireman's ladder, she had soon extended herself in no time at all to an enormous height. So high that her head and upper body was soon difficult to see from the ground, and high enough to reach an inconspicuous, unlabelled drawer not far from the shop's dimly lit ceiling. Then, after unceremoniously pulling the drawer out of its slot, she proceeded to de-extend herself, and soon was back to her old height and behind the counter. Inside the drawer that now rested on the countertop was a rectangular box of polished ebony, and beside it a key on a golden chain with a head shaped like a compass, whose needles moved restlessly this way and that above a face which was adorned with 4 coloured stones, one red, one blue, one green, one black, positioned where the directions of a conventional compass would be found. Whoever is to travel to the Forsaken Lands must first open the box themselves for the toll, which is contained within it. It is unknown to me and different for each traveller who wishes to cross the bridge of the cliffs of oblivion, said Patricia. But be assured I will ask a fair price for whatever the contents of the box are, although I must warn you they're often expensive. How expensive? Asked Douglas. How do we know we can pay for the toll if both of us and you don't know what it is? Well, the last time I saw the box opened, it was 80 years ago, for as I'm sure you realise, few are compelled to go to Forsaken Lands on a regular basis, replied Mrs. Parrott with a thin smile. And the contents then were 3 rhodium Guinean dollars, which of course had to be paid for with iridium ducats, 10,000 at current value. But I don't have iridium ducats, explained Monty. That's no problem. We sell iridium ducats. The going rate of exchange is 4 Peruvian pence for every ducat. So there's 40,000 Peruvian pence plus exchange fee of 2%, said Patricia curtly. Peruvian pence? That's not a real currency, said Jemima. Well, not frequently used, but real enough for your information, retorted the shopkeeper. If you don't have those on hand, you can purchase them from us, too. The going rate is 6.5 gold Tasmanian shekels for every Peruvian penny, so that 260,000 Tasmanian shekels for the 40,000 Peruvian pence for the 10,000 iridium ducats for the $3 rhodium million, which a 2% compound exchange fee included, of course. Now, if you don't have Tasmanian shekels, you can purchase them from us as well, but the going rate is rather steep. It'll cost you 500,000. Oh, this is simply ridiculous, interrupted and exasperated Montgomery Jones. How can I be expected to pay such an astronomical sum when currently all that lies between me and starvation is 1 shilling? He cried, producing a silver shilling from his waistcoat pocket. That won't do at all, agreed Portitia, with an irritated sniff. 1 shilling indeed. I'm not running a charity shop. No, Montgomery Jones. Why create a storm in a teacup when you have to pay if you haven't even seen what the toll is? Open the box, and then we'll cross the bridge if you get my meaning, said Muggins with a giggle. You make a valid point, Mr. McTarry, conceded Monty. OK, here goes. Nothing, everyone. And with that he lifted the black, shiny box out of the drawer, inserted the strange compass key into the keyhole at the front of the box, and turned the lock, which opened with a satisfying click. Well, I'll be, cried the giant old lady, when registering the contents of the open box. This is certainly one for the books. What is it? Exclaimed Douglas and Jemima simultaneously. It's sand, my young travellers, sand from the banks of the disappearing river, the very thing you will need to find it, or to be more precise, for it to find you, replied Portitia Parrott. But where are the coins that I have to purchase for the toll bridge? Asked Monty. Oh, there aren't any, said Muggins. I've reckoned that'd be the case. You folk aren't part of this world, so it stands to reason you should be able to travel to the Forsaken Lands free of charge. And as for the sand, someone or something wants you to get to the Forsaken Lands without difficulty, so these things are certainly starting to look up, my friends. But how much do I have to pay for the sand? Surely it's not free. It certainly isn't, Mr. Jones, replied Portitia Parrott. But that's what makes all of this so strange. For the price of a handful of sand from the banks of the disappearing river will set you back the princely sum of 1 silver shilling. Whoa, that is really weird, said Douglas. Written in the stars, methinks, shouted the leprechaun with glee. Now, Montgomery Jones, take the key and its chain and place it around your neck, for it is the second item that you'll need for your journey. The compass will guide you to the toll bridge, and don't worry about returning it. The key will be returned to its rightful place once it has led you to yours. When you're ready, take a handful of sand from the box and let it fall onto the floor beside you, and get into the boat when it's time. Are you not coming with us, Muggins? Asked Jemima. No, this is where I must leave you, my dears. No one of this world can travel on the disappearing river to the Forsaken Lands. But don't fret, all will be well. I'm sure of it. Now you must hurry. Montgomery Jones, you need to get on with it because you don't have much time left. Yes, I'm well aware of that. I'm feeling suddenly very old and very tired. I must admit that. But there's still strength left in this worn-out old husk. We'll get to the Forsaken Lands in time, by hook or by crook, remarked Monty with a grin. And Muggins, I can't thank you enough for all your help. Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Mr. Jones. I will always be grateful to you for freeing me from the terrible tree curse. Now be off with the lot of you before I get too emotional," said Muggins with a sniff. So Montgomery Jones took a handful of river sand out of the box and let the fine, light brown crystalline grains slip through his fingers onto the flagstone floor in front of him. Wherever the sand landed, water appeared, and the puddles joined and grew enormous, and soon everywhere except for where Douglas and his Uncle Jemima was covered in deep water, and the shop counter and all its drawers, and Patricia, Parrot and Muggins began to float away from them and disappear into the growing darkness. "Goodbye, and good luck, travellers from the world of reality," shouted Mrs. Parrot after them. "Be sure to point the compass so that its red stone always faces furthest from you," she added, her voice growing faint and echoey, as if she was disappearing into a tunnel. "Until we meet again, my friends, fare thee well, all of you," shouted Muggins, and then he too was gone. Now the water was vast and flowing, and the darkness about them had transformed into a misty grey blue sky, and they found themselves on a grassy embankment adjacent to deep blue, briskly flowing river, and not far from a wooden jetty to which was secured a boat whose green, rust-stained hull bobbed up and down rhythmically in the choppy, turbulent water. A huge pied crow was perched on one of the wooden beams of the jetty, and after peering at them intensely with its beady black eyes, it clicked its beak and announced, "All aboard for the Forsaken Lands," in a strange, hoarse voice. Then it clicked its beak again, cackled mischievously, let out a loud croak, and flew away. "What is it with this world, and always having to get to creepy destinations in dodgy boats?" moaned Douglas. "And there aren't any oars in this one either. I don't think anyone has brought along any pencils that we can enlarge. So now what?" "Well, I say, let's climb in and see where the compass takes us, and not worry about it too much, my boy," replied Montgomery. "After all, Muggins has never steered us wrong. Just have a little faith." "I agree with Professor Jones," said Jemima. "Come on, Doug. It's going to be fun." And with that, she clambered into the old boat and laughed with glee as she almost fell over with its rocking. "That's the spirit, Miss Hall," laughed Monty. "Steady the boat for your old Uncle Ducky." I'm getting in." Douglas held the boat as steady as he could while his uncle climbed into it, and it seemed to him suddenly that the poor man had indeed become terribly old and frail and shrunken, worn and threadbare, a shadow of his former extraordinary self. "Don't worry, you'll be okay. I have a good feeling about everything," whispered Jemima with a smile, seeing the look of distress on her friend's face. And then she shouted, "Next stop, the Forsaken Lands. Now on you get, Doug." So Douglas clambered into the rusty boat, and as he did, it slipped its moorings, and they were on their way